Adams, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Really fun show coming up. I've been wanting to have Terrence Edwards, the former UGA wide receiver, on the program for quite some time to talk about the receivers that Georgia is getting in this 2020 class. Also, some thoughts from him on George Pickens today. Seems like a really good day to do that, so we'll do that later on. Plus, some very interesting developments when it comes to the 2021 class. Jeff Sintel told us a little bit about this yesterday on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. We'll talk about that on today's program. We'll celebrate a very fun basketball win last night over the Tennessee Vols, and just generally speaking, have a really good time today. So I'm glad to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, sometimes on the show we have big, bold statements, hot takes, you can probably call them. I'll accept that as a description of some of the ridiculous things I may have said on this program from time to time. Sometimes, though, I think it's probably more important just to kind of ask provocative questions. And I guess this next topic for a couple of minutes is more along the lines of a provocative question more so than a definitive take necessarily, because I am kind of two minds when it comes to something that we dealt with back in January and Georgia's dealt with now for the last couple of years when it comes to players skipping the bowl game. If you've got a chance to go to the NFL, I kind of understand why you don't want to play in the game. I sort of get why that's kind of a thing for you, risk of injury, whatever else. And yet at the same time, I've always kind of made no secret about the fact that I love college football. I want college football as an institution to thrive. I think college football as a thriving institution is really better for all of us. I think it's good for society, and it's certainly good for the players who play the game. So I'm sort of always suspicious of these things that pop up, no matter what it might be, that kind of puts college football and you know, the way we've kind of experienced the sport in the past, when it kind of calls that into question. I'm always a little bit nervous about that. So, you know, players not playing in a bowl game, even though I kind of support the players' right to sort of do what they want to do, admittedly, as someone who loves the institution of the sport, it makes me nervous when guys decide they don't want to play in the bowl game. That's probably especially true when it's Georgia players, just because I care more about that program than I do the others. So with that in mind, and I won't spend a long time on this, but I did think it was interesting, Isaiah Wilson, in a article for NFL.com. Chase Goodbread, who's actually been on our show before, was talking to Wilson about getting ready for the draft and talking about all that kind of stuff, and the subject came up of why Wilson didn't play in the Sugar Bowl, and I thought it was at least worth it examining someone willing to kind of be honest about what all of this was about. And if nothing else, we kind of credit Wilson for his honesty in all of this, but the question came up of why weren't you there, why didn't you do this, and here's what Wilson, the very good offensive tackle for Georgia, had to say about this. He says, and this is to Chase Goodbread, NFL.com, "I'd only see my family like 3 times on non-football occasions, 3 days each in 3 whole years. I wanted to get back to my family one last time before embarking on the draft journey, because the same thing's going to happen, where in training I'm just going to have limited access to them." That's Isaiah Wilson, NFL.com. Now, I'm going to be really, really honest. Selfishly speaking, I want guys like Isaiah Wilson to play in the Sugar Bowl. I want that to happen. I want really almost all the players, I think, would be better off playing than not playing. But part of that for me is kind of fueled just by the selfish notion of I care about college football, and I like the idea of the players caring more about their commitment to college than they do anything else. I do think, though, in Wilson's case, the degree to which he's honest about this and the degree to which he kind of brings in kind of a family thing here beyond just risking injury for the bowl game, bringing the family thing in here on this, I think is really kind of interesting, because let's face it, if we were in that same spot, this would kind of be a pretty easy decision to want to make there as well. And I don't think it's the game so much that the players want to stay away from, as sometimes I think it's the practices that they might want to stay away from, that long build up to the bowl game. And, you know, sometimes the practices are maybe better suited for the younger guys who are trying to earn their spot on this team than they are for the guys who know they are on the way out of the program. This isn't for me totally an abstract conversation, because admittedly, had Georgia gone to the playoff and played in Arizona, I would have spent Christmas away from my family too. And the fact that I was able to be with them before going to New Orleans, I have to admit I did kind of enjoy that, even though from both a business standpoint and a personal standpoint, Georgia being in the playoff would have been a very good thing. So, as I said before, this is more of, I guess, a question than a bold take or something like that. But I do think college football's got to ask, what do you do about this? Do you just shake guys like Wilson's hand and say, thanks for your time in college, move on to the next person? Is there some sort of incentive that can be given to, you know, get these guys to stay around a little bit more? Now, in Georgia's case with the Sugar Bowl, it actually didn't hurt them on the field very much. Georgia went out and won the game. But it is a little bit of a weird look when so many guys make choices to do something other than play in the game. So I think it's interesting that Wilson's willing to be as honest on this as he is. I think this is a subject that's not going away anytime soon, and I don't know that there are really any simple answers to this one way or another. But if you care about the institution of college football, I think you care how college football solves this problem to the extent that it even is one. So I wanted to start the show for a couple minutes by at least addressing that. Let me move on, though, and talk about something else here for now. Y'all know around here, what is it? You say, is someone a stan if they're like just a really obsessive fan about something? That's probably a phrase that I don't quite have the street cred to be using, but I think it's probably fair to say that on this show we have been stans, so to speak, for Georgia wide receiver George Pickens. He has been our guy really for the entirety of his time at Georgia, and we were thrilled when he broke out in such a big way in the Sugar Bowl. 12 catches, 175 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, this was just an amazing thing to be able to watch, and I thought it was cool this week that ESPN honored him and Georgia safety Richard LeCounte for their bowl performances on kind of the all-bowl team. Both Pickens and LeCounte made mention from ESPN there. I'm going to focus for a moment on Pickens. I thought that Connor Riley did a good job this week at DawgNation.com, kind of talking about the central role that LeCounte could play for Georgia next year. So I think that Connor said that about as well as it could be said. So we'll let that stand on its own in terms of praise of LeCounte, and obviously we'll talk plenty about LeCounte over the course of the offseason. But I want to deal with the Pickens part of this too, because it seems like the news cycle spun so fast after the Sugar Bowl that I actually don't know that we've been able to give Pickens the credit he deserved for the performance that he put together in that Sugar Bowl. And frankly, the maybe entertaining for all the wrong reasons, nervous laughter, anxiety in the room from both Smart and maybe quarterback Jake Fromm, with Pickens getting a chance to speak to the media for the first time. Clearly there's been a lot going on behind the scenes, it would seem, with Pickens, but at least in terms of the end of this season, it all concludes with a really happy ending. It was cool to get a chance to hear Pickens talk that night about the season that he's been through, the performance he had against Baylor, and with ESPN honoring him this week, I thought it made sense to kind of circle back on some of this a bit too. And by the way, when Terrence Edwards joins us in a couple of minutes, good to have the former Georgia wide receiver with us. You better believe we'll get Terrence's thoughts on what he saw from Pickens at the end of this season. But let me start with this from Pickens after the Sugar Bowl about what it was like at practice this year, what it was like earning that spot on the field. And over the course of the season, some days more so than others, maybe earning the trust of the Georgia coaches. He talked about being pushed in practice from Kirby Smart, from Jake Fromm, and what that process was like. Here's a little bit of a guy we haven't heard a ton from. Here's Georgia wide receiver George Pickens.
It's really just him. He pushed me every day. Coach Smart pushed me every day to be the player I am today. So just me connected with him at practice all the time is really just the best thing.
Now, listen, I think we would all say it's good to be pushed. Guys need to be pushed to be more than just the collection of their raw athletic ability, because no one deny that Pickens' athletic ability is essentially second to none. He put himself in a pretty rare collection of freshman ball players in the country this year, showcasing that in the Sugar Bowl. And I think, and you'll hear more from Pickens on this in a moment, there's an extent to which he still needs to be pushed and still needs to be challenged to be the very best he can be in all phases of his life. And the fact that Pickens acknowledges that, and you'll hear that coming up in a moment, I think is a really good thing. However, there's also something that Pickens has. And one of the reasons why around here that we kind of stood beside Pickens and continued to vouch for him and continued to kind of hype him up, even though there was this occasional blip of, hey, maybe an off-field concern here, or maybe why is Pickens missing the first half of the Tech game, or, should he have controlled his emotions and anger better so he's not missing the first half of the Sugar Bowl? One of the reasons why we never turned our back on Pickens and never talked, down about Pickens or bad about Pickens is because within him, we see something that I think just can't be coached in. And it's not for him just athleticism. It's sort of a reckless abandon with the way he plays the game, the one-handed catch that went viral back during the summer, the way that he tries to leap over players in the Sugar Bowl included. It's just kind of an aggression that lives within him that I think the best football players seem to have a little bit more of than the average human being does. And Pickens, after the Sugar Bowl back on January 1st, late that night, he talked a little bit about that too.
I just play football, so when I see a guy running full speed, I try literally every option to avoid him. And I know it looks crazy when I'm trying to leap over people and risking injury, but just playing football.
How can you not like that? And how can you not want more of that on your team? And admittedly, there's maybe some stuff going on with Pickens that you want a little less of from him, and you certainly don't want too much of on the team itself. But in terms of that just aggressive nature, that kind of devil-may-care, I'm going to try to jump over you, now I may risk my own injury on this, but there's 5 more yards to be gained. There's a touchdown to be gained. There's a first down to be gained. Pickens seems just to have a little bit of that in him, a lot of that in him. I think that's a pretty good thing overall. A couple more things from him here real quick. And I told you before, there's a little bit of like nervous laughter from Smart and Jake Fromm because I think they know a lot of things that Pickens apparently has been through this season. And that kind of comes up. Listen to this question in particular, and you can hear the question because I want you to hear Fromm and Smart both interrupt on this, on the idea of how Pickens has grown during the year. The response from Fromm and Smart on this is almost more interesting than Pickens' answer himself. Take a listen to this.
George, do you think that you've grown up over the last 4 months and even...
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
He still got growing to do.
Yeah, I still got growing to do, but I can kind of tell myself that I'm improving every day.
Yeah, so I get that. I mean, Kirby Smart makes it clear that he's still got growing to do, and how could he not? He's only just now finishing up his freshman season, so I just think it's really funny to hear Smart and Fromm both on that same topic. Kind of a similar thing from Smart when at the end of the press conference after the Sugar Bowl, Pickens was asked, hey, how would you kind of describe your first year on campus? A little bit more of that kind of nervous laughter from Smart that lets you know there's a story behind the story. Here is Pickens again with a little bit of an interjection from Smart as well.
How would you describe this season, your first season in college football?
Careful, George.
I mean, it was a great season to me. I mean, you win some, you lose some, but I feel like every day, every practice, every walkthrough, we just fought. Like I like winning that way instead of winning the easy way out. I like fighting for the win.
Yeah, once again, I mean, listen, I understand what Smart's probably alluding to. I think a lot of us do, that there were a couple things this year that kept Pickens off the field. That's got to improve going forward. But once again, could you script a better answer for a description of your first year? Our team fought. I want to fight. That's the way I want to be defined as a player. That's the kind of influence I want to have on this team. I want to fight and do what's hard. That's always been that thing that we've seen in Pickens. That is the best of him, I believe. That willingness to fight, that willingness to compete, that willingness to do whatever it takes. And while there may be some rough edges that you want to smooth out a little bit, that spirit that's inside of him, I don't think you want to change that at all. So cool that ESPN honors him this week as one of the top bowl performers. Fun to look back on his time there at the Sugar Bowl, and really, really enticing to think what he might have in store as a sophomore coming up here in 2020. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Good to have you with us. Video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio in Athens at noon on 960 The Ref, and, of course, as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us. By the way, speaking of our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, had a great dinner this past Saturday night. My good friend, Bob Tharp, his wife, Ashley, we were able to hang out and have some dinner and talk about the great things they've got going on with their business, and just an incredible, I guess, generous spirit about wanting to help people. And it's one of the really cool things about Merriweather and Tharp, and one of the reasons why we love telling their story here on our program, DawgNation Daily, because if you're going through divorce, that can be a rough and scary process. And you want somebody smart on your side. You want somebody aggressive on your side. You want someone who's been through this thousands of times before. That's what Merriweather and Tharp provides. They are your source for Georgia divorce, because this is maybe your first time going through this, but they've been through this thousands of times. They can guide you through the chaos and get you back on a path to feel normal again someday, because you and your family both can feel normal again, but you've got to find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. It's theatlantadivorceteam.com. I let the cat out of the bag on this a little earlier. I'll remind you again, really excited about having Terrence Edwards, the former Georgia wide receiver, coming up on our show in just a couple of minutes. You better believe we'll talk about Pickens, but also a lot of these 2020 wide receiver signees, the Georgia Bulldogs. What kind of impact can they make as freshmen? We'll deal with Terrence Edwards on that topic here coming up in a moment. Before we get there, though, very interesting episode yesterday of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Georgia's still got some work left to do for its 2020 class, but for the most part, the hay is in the barn on that. It is now getting very much time to start thinking about the key storylines for 2021, and maybe nothing more important right now than the decision that Georgia might have to make at quarterback, the process it's going to go through between Brock Vandagriff, a recent decommitment from Oklahoma who lives in the Athens area, and Caleb Williams, an impressive five-star in his own right from that sort of Beltway, D.C. area. Georgia having to decide maybe which of these two quarterbacks it wants to fixate more on, wants to focus more on. this is going to be a very, very big topic here for as we head toward the class of 2021. Very, very interesting stuff. Jeff Sintel focused his time yesterday on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on that. Let me let you hear a little bit of this. We'll talk to Jeff about this more on our program tomorrow. I'll also invite you to check out the full episode of Before the Hedges on the DawgNation video channels for more on this. But as we go kind of around the doghouse here for a moment, here is, first of all, Jeff, his thoughts on the recently decommitted from Oklahoma, Brock Vandagriff, why it happened, and maybe what happens next. Here's Jeff.
Vandagriff just floats into the mix here as of January the 1st. That's when Vandagriff, it was just too far away, man. Too far away from grandma and grandpa, mom, dad, all the family, all the cousins to be able to come see him play. Oklahoma was just too far away. This was a Brock Vandagriff thing, not a Lincoln Riley, not an Oklahoma type thing. And with that, it probably brings only a couple of programs into the mix there for Brock Vandagriff.
So geography, that's the word I'm looking for. Geography is going to matter with Vandagriff. Vandagriff's a 5-star, incredibly impressive, the kind of guy you'd love to have. But he's not the only quarterback from that 2021 class you feel that way about. As I said before, Williams kind of has some of those credentials as well. Really, really dazzling on film, and a guy that has shown some interest in Georgia. So where do things stand with him right now? With Vandagriff kind of back in the mix again, Jeff Sintel talked about that too.
Caleb Williams has been the guy for Georgia for forever in the 2021 class, but like a lot of things in recruiting, it's complicated. And I think probably a piece of good news happened for Georgia on the Caleb Williams front when Joe Brady is making the move now to Carolina. Just to crystallize it and boil it down here, I think Georgia would love to have them both. I think Georgia is at the point now where the first one that wants to commit to the University of Georgia is going to get that spot.
Isn't it funny? It feels like we've been in this spot so many times with big national recruit who you might get, local product who you feel maybe is a little bit of an easier pull, although a pretty contested recruitment in its own right. Georgia has found these storylines so much in recent years, and it seems like it's back in that spot again. I think quarterback is a real position of need for Georgia moving forward in future years. As much as I like Caleb Williams, if it is easier to recruit Brock Vandagriff because he lives closer, I'd probably take that win and move on. But when you see the film for Caleb Williams, it's easy to make the argument for him, though, on the other side. This is a very interesting topic, and one I'm guessing that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, we're going to be talking about a lot here in the future. For now, though, let's turn our attention back to the world of Georgia wide receivers, both who they have had and who showed out for Georgia in 2019 and what might happen in 2020. Let's get ready to talk to Terrence Edwards right now. And it is always a real thrill to have the former Georgia wide receiver on the program, a guy that has really worked with a lot of these guys who you'll be seeing on the field for Georgia this year, but also has great expertise on the rest of the class and the group there as well. Terrence Edwards, welcome back to our program. It's really great to have you with us, and I hope you've been doing well here as we start 2020.
I'm doing well. How you doing, Brandon?
You know, I'm doing really well, and I want to talk to you about a lot of these guys, including the ones that you've trained who are going to be on this Georgia class for this year and kind of going through their first Georgia practice here pretty soon. Let me do one thing before we get there, because before you joined us, we talked a little bit more about George Pickens going back to the Sugar Bowl. ESPN honored him this week as one of the top bowl performers of the year, and you know, I thought that what Pickens did to close out his season, especially given what he'd kind of gone through off the field, missing a couple halves of a couple games, I thought it was such a poignant conclusion to his year. And I think back to before the season started, and you were very clear in your belief that you thought Pickens was a true number one receiver, that kind of true go-to guy. How impressed were you with what you saw from him in New Orleans? And I guess, where do you think he goes from here now?
Well, it's the sky's the limit. I don't know if people saw my tweet after the game, and I was saying that I'm going to move down to the third best receiver in Georgia history now, because I believe in this young man's ability. I think he's on par with AJ. You know, I always say AJ's the best receiver. I may have the numbers, but just football-wise, playing his position, AJ Green, and now George has a long way to go to finish out his career, but he's on the path to being one of the greats to ever play at the University of Georgia.
And so the other thing that you hear in this is, you know, the need to kind of grow and mature. Pickens himself has acknowledged that. Those around Pickens have kind of talked about that. Terrence, in addition, as you said, to being one of the great receivers in the history of this program, you are also a guy that works with a lot of young guys. I mean, how would you explain to us what this next offseason needs to be like for Pickens, and whatever he needs from a maturity standpoint or whatever else? How does he get that, and how do the coaches around him help him gain that? One
thing that he needs to do is just continue to work. Don't go in and read all your press clippings or how good you are. I mean, we know he's very talented. The sky's the limit for him now, but he just needs to go in and just take a mental check and, like, what do I need to do to be the best receiver that I could be? He does not need to be satisfied right now. To be great, you have to continue to self-evaluate, and sometimes it may not be on the field. He needs to self-evaluate what he needs to do personally just to mature as a young man. And if he continues to grow as a young man and as a football player, he's going to leave as one of the best to ever play. He's going to be a first-round pick once it's all said and done.
How about the receivers who will join him at Georgia and try to do what Pickens and Dominic Blaylock did this past year, which is have really big freshman seasons? A lot of these guys you've worked closely with, Jermaine Burton, Justin Robinson, Marcus Rosemy also coming in, Arian Smith as well. Let me kind of start, I guess, broad on this, and we'll kind of drill down on some of the more individual names. But what do you think of the crop of receivers that Georgia signed, and what's that process going to be like for them to get ready to also be freshman contributors the way that Pickens and Blaylock were able to do this past year?
Just all four of those guys I've been saying for this whole time, they bring something different to the table. All of them have attributes that is going to lend them to be awesome receivers once they put on the red and black. They just bring something different. You know, they have speed. Jermaine Burton has the blend of speed and just a pure receiver. Rosemy is a Riley Ridley type, a really sure-handed, big body, great route runner. And then Justin brings the 6'4" receiver that's going to be able to win 50-50 balls. And I've heard through the grapevine that doing early enrollment practice, doing bowl practice, he was making great catches over some of the older guys. So all four of those guys are going to bring something different, and they're going to be able to play talent-wise. They should get on the field. Now it's more just about being able to understand what the college game is about from the speed-wise and talent-wise.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit more about Justin Robinson here for a moment, because it seems like sometimes maybe, especially late in the process, because Robinson had been committed a little longer, that some more attention got paid to some of the other guys. But in particular with Robinson, a lot of Georgia fans love the idea of one of these guys who did big things in the state of Georgia as a high school player, getting a chance to show what he's all about. In particular, what do you think Robinson brings to the table for UGA?
I think he's going to bring the ability to catch 50-50 balls. He's going to be a red zone threat. He's going to be a guy that's going to make tough catches down the field in double coverage, because he is so tall and he has the ability to track balls and high point them. And it sounds so simple to do, but a lot of people do not have that ability to high point balls at a high rate as he does. So he's going to bring when the quarterback just need a play and need a play downfield, he's going to be the guy to be able to make the 50-50 catches like Lawrence Cager did for us this year.
And then with Jermaine Burton, I guess there had been some chatter for a while that he might be an early enrollee. He's coming in June. It's fair to point out that Blaylock and Pickens were both summer arrivals for Georgia last year. That didn't seem to hurt their development very much. But given the fact that some of these months for Burton going to take place away from a college campus, how does he get himself ready the way that Pickens and Blaylock seemingly got so ready so fast last year when they showed up in time for those summer practices?
Well, I can tell you right now, he's working his tail off right now in the weight room. He's working his tail off with me on the field. So, technique-wise, strength-wise, speed-wise, he's going to be ready once he get on the campus. Like I said earlier, now it's just going to be for him to get into the playbook and understand schematically what we're trying to do as an offense. That's just going to be his only problem. And what Justin is going to get, because Justin Robinson is an early enrollee, he's just going to be ahead of the curve once fall comes, because he's going to be there for spring and understand the playbook a little bit earlier. But Jermaine is a very intelligent football player, so just getting into the playbook. Actually, he went down to Athens on Wednesday just to go and hang out. So he's going to be there around the program. He just won't be an early enrollee.
One thing we know for sure about him is you're not going to take anything less from him than his full effort, right? You're going to make sure he's working hard, right?
Oh, most definitely. He's here in town. He's going to be in town for a while. So once he's here, we're going to get out there and work. And he's a guy that you're never going to question his work ethic. I mean, if you look at some of his Instagram posts or his Twitter posts, he's working his tail off right now.
I want to ask you about a couple of other recent additions to UGA in a moment, but let me kind of, I guess, piggyback off that for those of us who weren't players and kind of don't know what this process is like. We think about the physical demands that the SEC requires, and you've got to have the size, you've got to have the speed, but as you kind of touched on, Justin getting a chance to do this now, some of these other guys will get a chance to do this a little bit later on, in terms of what it takes from you mentally to absorb the playbook and absorb your responsibilities. How much of a challenge really is that for those of us who've never been asked to learn a Georgia-level playbook, an SEC-level playbook? How much are the mental demands on you when you go from high school to what I'm presuming is a lot more sophisticated offensive system in a place like Georgia? What's that challenge like really for all these guys who have to go through that?
I think that's the biggest thing that a young player goes through, just the mental aspect of the college game and just learning a different playbook. No knock on a lot of high school teams, but they're not as sophisticated as a college playbook. Young receivers have to learn on the run, and what I mean by that is you have to run man routes, you have to run zone routes, and they're not the same. You cannot run a man route in a zone coverage. You cannot run a zone route in a man coverage. So you're going to have to understand and be on the same page with the quarterback. That's one of the biggest things that I learned earlier is the quarterback has to trust me, and it's all about trust, and that happens on the practice field. So if those young guys can really understand and learn how to read defenses on the run and understand what routes you have to run, because there are different routes. There's a different dig route in the man, there's a different dig route in the zone. So you have to know which one you have to run pertaining to defense.
So obviously good wide receivers need to have good quarterbacks throwing to them, and it seems like Georgia may have added one of those in Jamie Newman. Also another transfer coming in, Trey McKitty, the tight end from Florida State, who's really caught some passes and been pretty active in that Seminoles offense. What did you make of these transfer additions to UGA and kind of how they fit into that puzzle?
Well, I've watched both of them films, and I reached out to a receiver I know on Wake Forest team, and he gave me some insight on Jamie Newman, and it's all positive. So I'm looking for big things from him this year. I'm looking to bring the aspect of having a quarterback who can pick up some first downs with his legs. I put on my Facebook page recently, like, I don't need Lamar Jackson. I just need a quarterback who could pick up 10 yards from 3rd and 9. And that's the way the game is going. I mean, Joe Burrow isn't Lamar Jackson, but he did a lot of damage with his legs, and that's all we need right now is a guy who can make plays with his legs. And if you watch him throw deep balls, man, these receivers should be ecstatic right now, being able to guy who can put them in position to make big explosive plays. And somebody asked me about the tight end yesterday. I just came up with 2 words. I say he reminded me of Olsen Charles. He looked like he was a big receiver coming out of high school that developed into a tight end. I didn't know about him coming out of high school. I know he went to IMG after doing a little research on it, but if you watch the guy, he's nimble, he can catch, and he's big, and he can run, and he definitely reminds me of Olsen Charles.
That is a very interesting comparison to be able to make, Terrence. We appreciate that. Before we let you go, as we kind of talked about before, you're doing all kinds of great work with next generation of receivers, a lot of those guys who play for UGA, some of those guys who play their college football other places, and really some of those guys very, very young, still a number of years away from making any kind of college decision. I always encourage folks who have sons who want to be receivers themselves or tight ends who want to be able to catch the football. I always encourage them to kind of get the kind of expertise and specialized training that you provide. So can you just remind folks, if they're looking at a young man who wants to be a receiver, how they can get in touch with you and maybe be a part of some of the work that you're doing?
Oh, most definitely. On all social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, my handle is TE, that's Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. You can send me a message, and we can have a consultation and talk about your son and see what we could do about getting him some lessons.
Hey, Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for being here on our program. We really appreciate that. We're looking forward to hopefully getting a chance to speak to you soon as well.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, really good stuff from Terrence Edwards there. A couple things I want to bring to the table. I think that Terrence could not be more correct about what he said about an athletic quarterback, that if you are Lamar Jackson, that's great, but you don't have to be the most athletic quarterback who's ever played the position, which was what at this point in time Jackson might be, the playoff loss this past weekend notwithstanding. You don't have to be in the 99th percentile of athletic quarterbacks. But if you have some athleticism, Joe Burrow's an example of this, some athleticism, it becomes one more thing for a defense to have to think about. And, Terrence said that he thought that the receivers at Georgia would be ecstatic about working with Newman because of his ability to throw the deep ball. One of the things I would like to have asked him about, just didn't have time to, is here's my assumption as well. I've not been a SEC-level defensive back. If you can look at me, you can probably tell that for yourself. But I'm assuming that if I'm a defensive back, all kinds of responsibilities, the idea that a quarterback might tuck it and run means that maintaining a certain degree of eye discipline is difficult to do, right? I mean, I'm trying to guard the guy that I'm tasked with guarding, but a quarterback who might take and run, I'm constantly having to be worried about what he's doing, which makes it a little bit easier for a wide receiver to run past me. I think that's one of the things that athleticism for Newman might be able to do. So I love the idea of that. I also think it's really interesting that when it comes to Trey McKitty, Terrence there makes the comparison to Orson Charles, who I remember, coming into Georgia, one of the more athletic players that Georgia brought in. The kind of the comparison between the size and the speed. Orson Charles certainly had a ton of that. So to think that someone like Terrence, who knows the position well, who knows the players who've played at Georgia well, to say, hey, this guy McKitty sort of compares favorably with a very athletic tight end like what Orson Charles was, one of the real unique athletes that Georgia has brought in before. If you're a UGA fan, I think you got to take that as some really, really good news. I also think it's really great, and I did see Terrence's tweet during the Sugar Bowl. It's just a really funny tweet and a very kind of nice, self-deprecating tweet that he says, I think I'm about to move down on the list, the pecking order of all-time great Georgia wide receivers because of what George Pickens is doing. I just think that's a really cool response from Terrence Edwards and all of that to kind of have some fun with this entire process. And it's great to see someone like Terrence, who really knows the position as well as he does, kind of vouch for what he's seen from Pickens this year in terms of what he can be. Sky's the limit. You heard that said a moment ago. Kind of a really, really nice thing to think about. And, those of us who care about UGA football, we're really lucky that we have guys like this who've done work with Georgia players. Obviously, we hear from Terrence on that from time to time. Sometimes we'll talk to our buddy Chuck Smith, who kind of does some of the same kind of stuff for defensive linemen and front seven guys. And obviously, John Stinchcomb works with some offensive linemen as well. But, I just think that individual coach, that influence beyond just the high school coaches or the future college coaches, that's a really important factor for a lot of these players. And those of us who care about Georgia football ought to be really glad to know that so many of the guys who are pouring their lives into these next generation of Georgia players are just good dudes who are like, they're not in it for themselves. They're not trying to gain a lot of glory for themselves. The best I can tell, they are doing everything they can 24 hours a day to make the players as good as they can be as both players and men. And I think that's just a really good thing. It doesn't have to be that way. You can certainly look at lots of examples across youth sports or high school sports or whatever and see a little bit more self-centered group of people sometimes that gather around elite athletes. Around Georgia football, that does not seem to be the case. It seems like there are a lot of guys like Terrence Edwards doing really good things for that next generation of player and for those who want Georgia to be as good as it can be on the field. Having good influences around those players while they're playing in high school, that's an important part of that process as well.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, we're getting ready to cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here. Some very interesting stories to get to here coming up. Before that, though, let me remind you that one of the things that really sets apart a Royal Caribbean cruise experience from anything else is the bold entertainment you get on the ship. I'm talking about, it's like a city's worth of entertainment, all kinds of stuff, whether it be Broadway, Tony Award-winning musicals, ice skating shows, dive shows, performance drones. On those Oasis-class ships, they have the Aqua Theater shows. You get these like Olympic level divers who are like, it's always amazing to me. On a moving ship, they're able to like perform these dives and these high leaps from way up in the air. They make it look easy. I can promise you it's anything but that. You've also got tremendous like nightclub options and things, live music, Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade. You better believe here around Dog Nation we love that. You need a vacation. There's no more fun choice than a Royal Caribbean cruise. So contact your own travel advisor about this, or let me recommend my friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can call them 800-326-4971. That'll get you in touch with the Cruise and Vacation Authority. Once again, 800-326-4971. But do me a favor, let them know you heard about them right here with us on DawgNation Daily. All right, couple things here. So this Joe Burrow goes on ESPN and says he's no longer a student athlete, so now it can be told, yes, Odell Beckham Jr., the former LSU wide receiver, was giving real money on the field on Monday night. We kind of all know this. No one's surprised about that. LSU tried to play this off at first. Now this is going to turn into a little bit of a thing. My guess is it probably just sort of dissolves into thin air sooner rather than later. Obviously, this will be the kind of video that's used as fodder against LSU for forevermore, right? I mean, this is ultimately the punishment they're going to get is the mocking tones of rival fan bases and message boards forever. I guess in terms of what I want to see happen here, I don't really know. I guess I'm not that fired up about this one way or another. To me, it seems just real simple to say, Odell Beckham Jr., you're not allowed back around here anymore. I mean, why are you acting like this in the football field, making this moment for these LSU coaches, these LSU players? Why are you making this about yourself and being the one that kind of gets talked about after all of this? If I was LSU and if I was the NCAA, I think the simplest move here is the guy that's acting wrong in all this is Beckham. I mean, you can't fault Justin Jefferson or someone like that for taking the money. I mean, it's heat of the moment. You stick it right there. I mean, it's almost be impolite to say, no, Joe, I'm sorry. Your money's no, or Odell, your money's no good here. So to me, the simple thing here is you ban Odell Beckham Jr. forever. You never let him around an LSU event. And, for those that follow the NFL closely, probably not the first time that he's done something, maybe not the wisest thing in the world to do. So that'd be kind of my thing on that. By the way, speaking of LSU, they are in the middle of what is now kind of a very interesting sort of series of announcements. Some guys going out of school, some guys staying in school. I guess the number's now up to 7 LSU guys who've committed for the NFL draft. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Justin Jefferson, Grant Delpit. Really probably no surprises among that group. You've also got some offensive linemen who've done this. Patrick Queen, the linebacker. So pretty big exodus at LSU. That's to be expected. The truth is LSU's recruiting just fine right now. They are probably going to be able to weather that storm, you would guess. T. Higgins, the Tennessee wide receiver, has announced that he's going to the NFL draft. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of these. Najee Harris from Alabama did say he's coming back. I guess based on what I was reading on this, it's certainly no secret that Harris hasn't always been happy at Alabama. He's told the San Francisco Chronicle that 2 off seasons ago or whatever. So, I mean, his relationship with Tuscaloosa has kind of always been weird. So on that basis alone, I guess it's somewhat strange that he is coming back to school. But I guess according to what I was reading, maybe there's a chance that the draft grade for Harris wasn't all that good. So I don't know. Do with that what you will. But Alabama fans celebrating Najee Harris' apparent return here apparently didn't get the draft grade that he wanted to get. Here's a story that might flow under the radar, but could have pretty interesting repercussions for Georgia down the line. So there's a title of a job at South Carolina. It's like Director of Player Development or something like that. I forget the exact title, but it's something along those lines. Marcus Lattimore, the former Gamecocks running back, has been in that role, kind of in that spot after his professional football career came to a short end because of injuries and whatnot. Well, now Lattimore is out, and in his place is Connor Shaw, the former South Carolina quarterback. Now, first of all, this is interesting because just given all the former UGA players that work for Will Muschamp at South Carolina, I didn't realize that South Carolina knew they could hire someone other than former UGA guys for staff positions. Obviously, Joe Cox just became the most recent UGA guy to get hired there. But no, Muschamp is actually hiring a South Carolina guy here in Connor Shaw to fill this spot. Now, this is why this matters. Connor Shaw's brother is obviously Jabo Shaw. Jabo Shaw is the head coach at Rabun County, where 2022 quarterback Gunnar Stockton is a very, very impressive quarterback prospect. So there could be a feeling out there that Bobo already a relationship with Stockton. Connor Shaw, his brother, is the high school coach. That this is a pretty strong attempt for South Carolina to put itself in a position to go out and get a big-time quarterback for the 2022 class. Now, obviously, you already know that the 2022 class is kind of a long way away, and the South Carolina coaching staff, as it is on a little bit of shaky ground despite beating Georgia. They were only 4-8 this year. So this could be a very interesting soap opera worth watching, that if Muschamp and his staff, Bobo included, can perform well enough this year to return some stability to Columbia, then the Gamecocks could be in a position maybe for a pretty impressive quarterback for the 2022 class. I'm obviously connecting a lot of dots here that may or may not end up being connected, but South Carolina trying to be a player in future recruiting classes, that's what the Connor Shaw move would seem to indicate to me they want to be able to do. So follow that, and we'll see where that goes. One more thing real quick here as we're cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'm going to get to the Georgia win over Tennessee in a moment, but also a couple other really fun basketball games last night. First of all, Alabama beats Auburn. This is like one of those great college basketball nights. Coleman Coliseum was rocking. Auburn obviously came into the game undefeated. I realize that almost none of you watched this, but it was actually pretty fun. South Carolina also knocked off Kentucky last night as well. So kind of a fun night on the SEC hardwood, and included in that was Georgia's win against Tennessee. So we'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean and talk a little bit about the Dogs here against the Tennessee Vols. And in particular, one of the things that we called for in this game, going back to yesterday's show, was, hey, this would be a night for Anthony Edwards, for Ant-Man to really put his stamp on a game. And I thought last night he really did that. And, the moments, admittedly, up to, I think, last night where Edwards has been the most spectacular are kind of moments in which games are already decided. The second half run in Maui against Michigan State comes to mind on all of this. Other moments in, like the Auburn game a bit where the game's kind of already decided and Edwards is just kind of showing off what he can be and kind of what he's all about. Well, last night was for a chance for him to kind of do that in a winning effort. And obviously for Edwards, he's got his mind on, a lot of things right now, but beating Tennessee was apparently something that was really important to him. In fact, the backstory between these two teams and the really bad loss that Georgia suffered in Knoxville a year ago was apparently on a lot of these players' mind, and they were kind of imparting this on Edwards and some of the other freshmen to make a big deal about this. In fact, after the game, Ant-Man kind of told that story about why beating Tennessee was really important for UGA last night. I think this is really good stuff from the Georgia freshman. Take a listen to this.
To get on a winning streak, we got to win one game at a time. So we won this game. And we got to get another one-game winning streak, so we're going to try to go on the road and win another game. So it just felt great. And Tyree Crump had a big speech during halftime. It was like they beat us real bad last year, so we can't let them come here and beat us. So we just took that and ran with it.
So Tyree Crump apparently stepping up at halftime. And remember, this is a halftime that ends on a high note for Georgia. There was some celebrating and some dancing with the students on the way into the locker room there. But apparently Crump tried to recenter everything and get everybody refocused, saying, hey, let's not forget what this team did to us a year ago. Let's not lose that edge, lose that focus in the second half. It sounds like a well-timed speech on Crump's part because Georgia obviously goes out and plays really well here in the second half of this game. A very nice thing to see. And speaking of kind of having a good time with the students and all of that, also kind of a nice exchange from Ant-Man last night on that topic of, wanting to see what Stegeman Coliseum can be as a home court advantage and, having an experience inside there, much the same way the Sanford Stadium student crowd has kind of always provided. Once again, good stuff from Ant-Man here on what was a really fun night for UGA. Take a listen to this.
Basketball is always business for me. Because I'm trying to make a lot of money playing this game, but you never let the fun get taken away from you. That's why you play it, because it's fun. Like someone asked me earlier about the crowd. That's fun to me to get the crowd involved and get them real hyped. So I never let the fun get taken from me.
You said before the season you wanted to pack it out and hear like football games. Did you hear the just like football cheer from the fans? And did you?
Yeah, I was on the sideline dancing when they were saying that. I was pretty happy.
So listen, I think that's great. On the sideline dancing, really, really happy. And I wasn't at the game last night. I was watching it on TV, but it certainly looked like Stegeman Coliseum was a lot of fun last night. It wasn't all, though, happiness. I guess there is the injury situation for Severe Wheeler here we'll have to watch and pay attention to. He's proven to be a very important player for Georgia, so you'll keep up and pay close attention to that injury status. But in terms of the overall larger headline, Georgia getting a big SEC win last night against Tennessee. The only thing I've really asked for is, hey, let's make basketball matter. Let's make these games worth paying attention to. And after an 0-2 start in the SEC play, admittedly against two very good teams, arguably this league's two best teams in Kentucky and Auburn, the Tennessee game was huge for Georgia last night, and you got to give them a lot of credit for stepping up and playing the way they did last night in Stegeman Coliseum. Good to see the Dogs getting a win. I'll also say this, if you think about two of the really big topics in today's show, George Pickens from the Sugar Bowl a little earlier on the basis of what ESPN said about him this week, Ant-Man last night because of the win against Tennessee. Things are never going to be perfect for a college sporting fan base. There's always going to be reasons to nitpick with this and nitpick with that, and there'll always be no shortage of concerns over, for instance, who Georgia's new assistant coach is going to be, that 10th coaching opening still there, or which quarterback you should choose the 2021 class and which one you should prioritize. There'll always be those issues. But it is kind of nice every now and then to sort of stop and say, wow, we spent a good bit of time today on today's show talking about George Pickens in football, Anthony Ant-Man Edwards in basketball. Two phenomenal athletes and actually pretty magnetic personalities. If those are the kinds of guys we're talking about here at Georgia, those kinds of impressive performers, then we're all pretty lucky all the way around. Another way in which we're lucky, 1,174 days. That's our Gator Header Updater. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We got enough time for a nice little 10-minute run here. Your comments on pretty much anything that you want to discuss from today's show. And we'll do it on Facebook, YouTube. You never know. I may even pull up some stuff on Twitter here as well. And we'll kind of roll through that and get your opinions on pretty much anything. In fact, I'll start on Facebook here for a moment. And as I do, I'll remind you that our friends at R.S. Andrews make it all possible. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. They take good care of you and all of that. It is going to be very cold again next week. It hasn't been super cold this week. I totally realize that. But next week it's going to be cold again, which means you're going to want to have your heating system working the way that it's supposed to. And you're going to want that peace of mind to know that it's going to make it through the winter to come. So that's why you want that R.S. Andrews Mega Furnace Safety Check. It's just $99. You can find out more about it online at rsandrews.com. All right, over here on video for a moment for a few comments. Yeah, somebody mentioned the buzzer beater for South Carolina over Kentucky. Yeah, good basketball last night. Keith Folds was also at the UGA game saying that it was crunk in the first half. Second half was a cakewalk, so it was a little laid back. I was going to a ton of games, really essentially a season ticket holder during the Tubby Smith era. Think about 95, 96. I was at a lot of those games. Jim Herrick era, 2002-ish, 2001, 2002, 2003, that kind of era. I was going to a lot of those basketball games, and people, obviously with good reason, think of Georgia as a lot more of a football school than a basketball school, and sometimes you can kind of think of a sleepy atmosphere around Stegman Coliseum with not as many fans in the building. There have been moments when that's been true. But listen, a packed gym for a college basketball game, kind of a rivalry atmosphere like Georgia-Tennessee, there's really nothing better. I mean, I just love it. And I know around here we'll always talk 99% football, but I love a good college basketball game. And I love a night last night where you had some home crowds getting a chance to celebrate upsets. I just think that's really fun, really fun. Mike Little says, how's the coaching hire going? Obviously, we got our attention on that. We talked a lot about that on yesterday's show, and we'll kind of find out more about what Kirby's thinking about that, hopefully in the days to come. But if last year's any indication, Kirby's going to take his sweet time about this and say very little along the way. So that may be a little frustrating, but that is kind of the way that's going. Rhett Dallas on the subject of Zack Evans. We may never know for sure whether he was, fully qualified to come to Georgia as an early enrollee and what factor that may have played in Georgia's decision to apparently, as has been reported, move on from him. We may never know that. But that's another one of those, I guess, points of curiosity of where he does end up. Which SEC schools would still consider themselves in the running for him, be willing to accept that, that arrival from Evans. It certainly seems like the list of schools who've decided they don't want to be in the Zack Evans business is kind of growing. Georgia, I guess, included on that. So Joel Moody says, not the Evans soap opera again unless we're signing him. Yeah, I mean, once the official reports kind of came out, we sort of made the decision to white flag this and move on. And we've kind of left that there in the past. Phil Rogers says, has a date been decided for G-Day yet? That's a good question. I don't know. Is there an official date for G-Day? No, I guess no official date for G-Day yet. Generally, Georgia is one of the later SEC teams when it comes to its spring game. Not always the latest. I think it may have been the latest last year. But generally, there's about 3 weekends worth of spring games. For whatever reason, Georgia is typically more on the back end of that than the front end of that. Myra Herbert Bush says it's a bad look for LSU in allowing Odell. Yeah, listen, I certainly understand why the opposing fans are going to use this kind of jab at LSU on this, but I can't blame LSU for what Odell Beckham Jr. did. I mean, most programs want to have some connection to their NFL guys because it's kind of a good thing to be able to do, but you can't ever really know that one of your guys is going to come in there and act the fool in that manner. I can't criticize LSU for that too much. Now, I think it's all fair game and message boards to say whatever you want about them. And to be frank, this is probably video evidence of what I think a lot of folks outside the SEC assume SEC teams are doing all the time anyway. But this to me is more Beckham acting like a fool than it is LSU doing anything all that nefarious. Manuel Infante says, BA, say crunk again. I'm glad you enjoyed that. I am glad you enjoyed that. Over here on YouTube. Cliff Bain says, who's better, Mac Jones or Jamie Newman? Dogs have the better quarterback in my opinion, but curious what others think. I also think it'll be interesting to see if Mac Jones ends up being the Alabama starter. Because I would think there's a really good chance that Bryce Young, the freshman quarterback coming in, could push him. I think it's not a complete and total given that Alabama won't consider itself in the transfer market as well. So the Newman-Jones comparison is an interesting one to make, but for me, it's not obvious that Mac Jones will start at quarterback for Alabama next season. Appreciate that, Manuel. Thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. What else? Dog laugh ain't easy. Talking about the end of the Iron Bowl for Alabama. Shane Elliott says, do you think that Georgia should have an offense like the Falcons on their Super Bowl run and use a lot of play action pass, more to set up the run game and do more quick screens? Yeah, obviously I'd love that. I mean, I do love Kyle Shanahan as a play caller. I do think it's fair to say that just generally speaking, college offenses are a lot less sophisticated than the NFL offenses. Shanahan may be as sophisticated as maybe any of them. Play action pass, an example of that. While play action really, really works almost every time it's used, there is, I guess, one detriment to its execution, the fact that you're asking a quarterback to turn his back to a defense to execute the play action fake, and then turning back around, looking at the defense. Sometimes things aren't standing in the same spot where you left them. What was it that Sam Darnold said about seeing ghosts? I think you ask a lot of college quarterbacks to do too much, they themselves are going to start seeing ghosts as well. If nothing else, there's one thing in particular for that Shanahan used a lot that I think would be really easy for an offense like Georgia to institute. That's just more like pre-snap motion. Just send more guys in motion. Just that alone seems relatively easy to do, and that alone seems like a wrinkle that would kind of pay off. So, yeah, I mean, I love what Shanahan did with Atlanta with Matt Ryan, but Ryan at that time was a veteran NFL quarterback, had been in the league for a number of years. And for those of you who care about this, go back and look at Ryan's numbers in Shanahan year 1, 2015, compared to 2016. It even took him a couple of years to get comfortable with that. I think that's one of the big reasons why you see NFL teams throw to tight ends all the time, and college teams just don't do that very much. Because a tight end, unless you have, the best tight end in the country, the tight end is not going to be the primary read in a progression very much. And there just aren't many college quarterbacks who get to the third progression. They're just not. It's a look here and throw it. And almost anything else, in terms of like four guys running routes, most of that, in my opinion, based on some of the stuff that I've read, most of that's just window dressing. So yes, short answer is I'd love to see it. Georgia sort of use some of what seemingly works in the NFL, but admittedly, almost every NFL offense is far more complex and intricate than what almost every college offense is doing, the pro-style ones like Georgia included. A couple more comments here. Kappa UGA 2018 says Newman plays quarterback like the old James Jackson back in the 90s. Well, James Jackson, if we're thinking about the same one, was in the 80s. Jackson was a mid-80s quarterback at Georgia, and his name actually came up on one of our other broadcasts not too long ago as well. Jackson was also much more of a runner than a thrower, and I don't believe that's what Newman wants to be thought of as. I think that he was asked to run a lot at Wake Forest because what else are they going to do? I think that a guy like that's coming to Georgia to show what else he can do beyond that. And, if Newman had 500 whatever yards rushing for a Wake Forest a year ago, my presumption is he'll have less than that at Georgia, that he'll be much more of a thrower compared to a runner at UGA, because that's the skill set that I believe that he possesses, and that's what he wants to show off. I continue to say, while I love the idea of some designed runs, ultimately, I just want to see Newman take off when a play breaks down, because plays will break down. And to turn a broken down play into some positive yards over the course of the season, that really adds up. And the mental, psychological toll that takes on a defense who thinks it's got everything covered, and then suddenly this guy just does that in itself is incredibly valuable. So I think that Newman is coming to Georgia to be a thrower, but the fact that he can run, even if it's just keeping plays alive, I think that's going to have incredible value. Let me go back over to Facebook for a moment. Got a couple more minutes here. Trey Edwards says Newman's going to throw it all over the field and run when needed. that's certainly the description that I hope ends up being true for him. And Trey, I believe you're probably right about that. Somebody said they'd love to see DeAndre Swift with Newman. Yeah, that'd have been quite a tandem for sure. John Arena says that. It would have been quite a tandem. Matt Talley says that Brock Vandegrift kind of reminds him of the Golden Arm recruit from Blue Mountain State. Y'all remember that show? Yeah, listen, he's kind of got that everybody's All-American vibe to him. I think that Caleb Williams does as well. It's a tough choice to make, and it is a choice in terms of who you prioritize. And, if I'm Georgia, I just think that Georgia needs to rebuild its offensive reputation, needs to rebuild its offensive image, especially if what I said earlier in the show is true and that the presence of Connor Shaw at South Carolina makes recruiting Gunner Stockton more difficult. That puts more pressure on you to really make sure you nail that 2021 quarterback option. And if I can get Brock Vandegrift, I'm going to be forced to shake Caleb Williams' hand. I think that Williams is a dazzling prospect. And frankly, I hope I don't have to play against him if he's not going to be playing for me. If I'm Georgia, that's the way that I would probably feel about that. But you got to take a win where you can get one. And Vandegrift is an impressive player in his own right. If geography matters to him, if playing close to home matters to him, that's what UGA can provide. That seems like the win you take, and you call yourself a big victor for doing so. That's my personal opinion on that. Matt Talley also giving you a little bit of a line from Varsity Blues, the I Don't Want Your Life, James Vanderbeek. Shane Busby on the subject of off-season interest. The one thing we've been very lucky about around here is, a long time ago, I won't bore y'all with the details on this too much, but we are first starting DawgNation Daily. My boss at the time said, how often should we do it? And I said, we should do it every day. And he thought I meant every day during the season. First of all, he thought every day would be a lot, and every day during the season, maybe. But when I told him no, we would just keep doing it all throughout the year. And he was like, really? Do people want that? Like, the one thing I always knew is that there would be an appetite for Georgia football that existed even when games are not being played. Today, for instance, this is like a random Thursday in January. Georgia hasn't played a game in 2 weeks, and yet there's still massive interest. And really, from a numerical standpoint, we're very consistent for the full 12 months. Massive interest in, 2021 quarterback recruiting and how Georgia fills some of its needs for 2020. And just getting a chance to talk to a guy like Terrence Edwards. Like, who wouldn't want to do that no matter what month it was, right? I mean, thankfully, I recognized that need when this show began. And it's a fun topic, right? Georgia football, doesn't get any better than that. And we knew that people's interest in Georgia football didn't go down just because games weren't being played. And so we took a risk on that, took a bet on that. For us, it's worked out. And yeah, numerically, we do about the same thing during the off season as we do during the season. Thankfully, that's true. Travis McCullough, thanks for being here. Appreciate you checking in. What else? We're going to get very, very quickly off the air for this. James Crump says, either way, we don't need Vandegrift or Williams to go to Florida because there'll be problems in the future. Yeah, I said that about Caleb Williams earlier. As much as I might have to choose Brock Vandegrift if I can win that recruiting battle sooner and feel more certain of that, if I could do that, I'd probably have to take that. Admittedly, I don't want to play against Caleb Williams if I can certainly help it. Bob Garrison also brings up a really good point. Over the last couple of years, really more than a couple, last few years, Georgia has kind of become a better state for quarterbacks. And if you look at this over the course of decades, people have written about this. Certain states produce certain positions more frequently than others. For instance, Georgia has essentially kind of always been the best state in the country for defensive linemen. And defensive linemen is a little bit like quarterbacks. It's a very specific position. There's just not that many of them. There'll never be enough to go around. Georgia's kind of always over-indexed in the production. And I have no idea why this is. But Georgia's just kind of always over-indexed in the production of elite defensive linemen. This is just a state that produces that. For a long time, like say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Georgia was not really thought to be a quarterback state. Florida was, Texas was, California was. Well, Georgia is becoming more of a state for quarterbacks, not just like the really high-end elite guys like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, but just FBS quality quarterbacks. Georgia's just producing more of those than they used to. Now, my only theory on this is that population growth is probably a factor here. That's probably my only theory on this. But one way or another, it is just becoming kind of more of a state for quarterbacks. And so Georgia admittedly has missed on a couple of those guys. So getting the chance to not miss on someone like Vandegrift because he is from the state of Georgia, admittedly, that is part of the factor for me on this. I think that's probably true. Killen Worthy says, BA, we need to go after both quarterbacks. Whoever commits first, that's who you go hard after. That's what I would say. I actually don't disagree with that. I think that's probably fair. I think you can go after both until one is ready to move. I guess my assumption on this is that Caleb Williams is the one that's willing to wait the longest, and that could be an incorrect assumption. I may be wrong about that. But my assumption is that he's maybe a little bit more willing to wait a little bit longer. But there's nothing wrong with going after both as long as you make it clear that you're kind of, looking to see who wants to come first. So I got no problem with that at all. I think that's a very fair thing to say. One or two more, and then we are going to get off the air after that. Let me pop over here to YouTube just for a moment. Enrique Murillo says, what do you want to see from the team this offseason? This would be a good place to finish up for today. All I want to see is a little bit of a freshened approach to how this team goes about its business offensively. All I want to see is some sort of tangible, visible evidence this team really does take seriously the need to maximize its offensive talent at receiver, at running back, at quarterback, at everything else. I think that Georgia is one of the best programs in the country, and there are at least 120-something teams that would give everything they have just to be where Georgia is right now. But those next couple steps towards your future progression, those are oftentimes the hardest steps to take. And I think for Georgia, it means becoming a little something different offensively, not dramatically different, not wildly different, but just slightly different, adding a little spice to the entree more so than completely changing all the ingredients. And I would love to see some real evidence of that this offseason. The reason why I keep seeing evidence, too, the reason why I keep saying that word is because if you want to go back and look last year at the hiring of James Coley, there was very little publicly said about that all the way around. It just wasn't talked about all that much. It just was not the kind of thing that kind of came up. This year I'd love to not only see a move get made by hiring the 10th coach, but have some sort of word spoken as to why it's taking place and what the objective is for the direction that Georgia goes. Obviously, I'm also hoping, and at least for now, assuming that'll be an offensive-minded name, but that's what I'd love to be able to see. So my wish for the offseason, that's what it is. A tiny upgrade for Georgia offensively so that 5-star quarterbacks of the class of 2021 and elite playmakers still view Georgia as a place they want to be. We'll have more time to talk about this in the days ahead. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down today. I'll also remind you to check out the AJC for Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Big NFL playoff weekend coming up. Got a preview of that there. Also, as we head towards the weekend, big things going on in our city. You can keep up with all the big events and things going down there at AJC.com, plus how the Braves react to losing a big slugger. There's plenty of that coverage there as well. So get your Atlanta News Now and check in throughout the day at AJC.com. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. We trust them for our air conditioning needs, our heating needs, plumbing, electric. If your water heater goes out, they are a great resource for you. Dari's a huge college football fan and a guy who loves the kind of conversation we're able to have here each and every day. So you'll like the whole team over there. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Thanks for being here today. We'll see you back to here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to speaking to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.